In the morning fog of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a starving bobcat lay in a dry creek bed, wrapped around a torn green bag as if it were his last breath. The rescue team thought it was trash until they pried it from his claws and looked inside, finding tiny bells, stitched names of dead cats, and the trail of a lonely old man. From that moment on, a strange journey began, a wild heart, a bag of memories, and the hardest kind of rescue of all, learning to let go so the one you love can finally live. The storm had blown through in the night, leaving the Blue Ridge Mountains wrapped in a heavy morning fog. It was the kind of gray, quiet morning that made sound travel farther than it should. And Jake Miller had learned long ago that some sounds you never ignore. His boots sank softly into the damp leaf litter as he walked the narrow trail, checking for fallen trees and rock slides, the way he'd done 100 times since retiring from the fire department and joining the local search and rescue team. At 57, his knees complained more than they used to, especially after a long night listening to hail rattle his windows and thinking about property taxes, home insurance, and the stack of bills on his kitchen table. But the forest had a way of quieting all that noise in his head. Up here, it was just the wind, the trees, and whatever needed help on any given day. He was halfway around a bend when he heard it. At first, he thought it was a branch scraping against a tree, or maybe the creak of an old trunk in the wind. Then it came again, higher, thinner, like a baby crying inside a cave. The sound rose and broke into a rasping yowl that didn't belong to any human throat. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Jake stopped and listened. The fog pressed in around him, turning the world into soft shapes. There it was again, off to his right this time, somewhere down the slope near the dry creek bed. A cry, then a low, grinding growl that sounded like it came from a chest full of gravel. He raised his radio. "Mia, you catching that?" he asked. Static hissed, then a young woman's voice answered. "Yeah, I hear something. I'm about a quarter-mile behind you. Want me to cut over?" "Yeah, angle toward the creek," Jake said. "Bring your kit. Whatever that is, it's hurting." He slipped off the trail, picking his way between wet rocks and roots. The smell of damp earth and broken pine needles rose as he moved downhill. The crying grew louder, more frantic now, with sharp edges that made his chest tighten. He remembered the first time he'd heard a bobcat scream, years ago on a late-night fire call. It had sounded like a woman being murdered in the woods. This was close to that, but softer somehow, broken up by long, hoarse breaths. A fallen oak marked the edge of the dry creek bed. Jake eased around it and stopped. At first, all he saw was a splash of muddy brown against the gray stones. Then his eyes adjusted and the shape resolved into a small body hunched over something on the ground. It was a bobcat, but smaller than some he'd seen, ribs showing under the matted, rain-soaked fur. Its ears were torn at the tips, its paws caked with mud. One back leg stuck out at an odd angle. The animal was curled around a dark green canvas bag, like a child wrapped around a favorite blanket. Its front paws clutched the fabric, claws sunk in deep. Every time it dragged in a breath, its sides shuddered. "Easy there, buddy," Jake murmured, more to calm himself than the animal. "Nobody's here to hurt you." The bobcat's head snapped up, yellow eyes fixed on him with a wild, feverish light. Its lips peeled back, showing broken teeth, but it didn't let go of the bag. Instead, it pulled the canvas closer, tucking its chin over it, a hoarse rumble building in its throat. Jake had seen animals protect food, young, even territory, but never a bag like that. "Jake?" Mia's voice came from above him. "Where are you?" "Down in the creek bed," he called quietly. "Watch your step. Rocks are slick." A moment later, Mia slid into view, long dark braid damp from the fog, backpack slung over one shoulder. She froze when she saw the bobcat and the bag. "Oh," she breathed. "He's in bad shape." The bobcat's body trembled, but when Mia took a cautious step closer, it hissed, pressing its chest harder against the bag. Jake lifted a hand, palm out. "Hold up," he said softly. "You see that?" He had a clean shot to run when you came down. He didn't move. He's not guarding this spot. He's guarding that thing. Mia frowned, studying the animal. "It's not a food bag, not for him anyway. Looks like something a person would carry. Maybe a camping pack?" "No straps. Looks more like an old duffel," Jake said. A thought crossed his mind, uninvited and ridiculous. Maybe it held something valuable, the way folks worried about their wallets or credit cards, or even an old life insurance policy locked in a drawer. But whatever was inside, this cat had decided it was worth dying for. He took a slow step to the side, testing the bobcat's reaction. The animal's gaze followed him, but its paws never loosened on the canvas. Every muscle in its thin body seemed to vibrate with tension, yet it looked ready to collapse at any second. Its sides heaved, and he could hear the wet rattle in its lungs. "He's not going to last long like that," Mia whispered. "If he's been out here since the storm—" Jake nodded. "We can't handle this alone." He thumbed his radio. "Base, this is Jake Miller. We've got an injured bobcat, possible broken leg, severe dehydration. Animal is clinging to a canvas bag and showing high stress. Requesting wildlife support and law enforcement backup at marker 7B on Ridge Loop." The reply came quickly. "Copy that, Jake. Dr. Holt is on call. We'll page her. Sheriff's office says Deputy Harris is nearby. He'll head your way." Mia shifted, eyeing the slope behind them. "If Cole comes down here and that cat so much as twitches, he's going to want to use his gun." "Not if Karen gets here first," Jake said. "And not if we keep a lid on things until then." He studied the bobcat again. The animal had stopped growling, its head drooping, but its paws still clung stubbornly to the bag. One claw had torn through the fabric, and Jake could see just a hint of color inside. Something not quite like clothing, not quite like gear. His curiosity prickled, but the way the cat's body tightened when his eyes drifted toward the rip told him all he needed to know. Whatever was in that bag, it wasn't trash, and it wasn't food. It was something this half-wild creature believed it could not live without. The fog thickened, muffling the world until it felt like there was nothing left outside the three of them and that strange green bag. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called once and fell silent. Jake felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders, heavier than his rescue pack. He glanced at Mia. "You feel that?" he asked quietly. She nodded, eyes never leaving the bobcat. "Yeah," she said. "This isn't just an injured animal call." Jake looked back at the trembling creature, its chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate breaths, its claws locked in the canvas like it was holding on to its own heart. A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the damp air. Whatever they were about to step into, it was bigger than a simple rescue. And it all started with a crying bobcat and a bag it refused to let go. The wait in the fog never lasts as long as it feels. 10 minutes can stretch out like an hour when you're watching a wild animal breathe like every breath might be its last. Jake stayed where he was, one slow step above the creek bed, talking low just to keep the air from going dead silent. Mia hovered a little higher on the slope, hands ready, eyes flicking between the bobcat and the path they'd used to come down. They heard the others before they saw them. Boots on rock, a muttered curse as someone slipped, and then a man's voice calling down. "Miller? Lopez? Where are you?" "Down here," Jake answered. "Careful, it's slick." Deputy Cole Harris came into view first, broad shoulders filling the narrow cut in the trees. He was in his 40s, uniform damp from the fog, one hand resting near the holster at his side out of long habit. Behind him, Dr. Karen Holt picked her way down more slowly, a small duffel over her shoulder, gray streaks in her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She'd patched up everything from hunting dogs to black bears in these mountains, and she carried herself like somebody who'd seen what panic and pain could do. Cole's gaze went straight to the bobcat. "Well, there's our problem," he said under his breath. "You didn't mention he was hugging luggage." "He was like that when I found him," Jake replied. "Hasn't let go once. Broken leg, dehydrated, maybe worse. But that bag is what he cares about." Karen crouched, studying the animal from where she was. "He's running on fumes, she said quietly. "If we don't move him soon, his kidneys will start to fail. Heart could go next. We need to get him sedated and out of here." Cole shifted his weight. "And what happens if he wakes up in town and decides somebody's kid looks like breakfast? You know how this goes, Karen. I've got people talking about home security, school safety, higher taxes for animal control. They're already on edge about property values, mortgage rates, all of it. Last thing they want is a bobcat with a taste for the suburbs." Karen didn't look up. "This is not a monster," she said. "This is a sick animal who's confused and desperate. Let me do my job before we start talking worst-case scenarios." Jake held up a hand. "Look, nobody here wants to see anybody get hurt. Let's just stick to the plan. We get him in a cage, Karen checks him out, we figure out what's next, one step at a time. Same way you handle a stack of bills or a pile of credit card statements. You take them one at a time so they don't crush you." That earned him the smallest twitch at the corner of Karen's mouth. Cole grunted but didn't argue. Everyone in that circle knew what it was like to worry about health insurance premiums, car insurance, retirement savings, and the price of groceries all at once. A wildcat was just one more problem on top of a dozen others. Karen opened her bag, pulling out a long syringe attached to a pole. "Mia, I'm going to need you on the net. Jake, you're the distraction. Cole, keep that gun holstered unless I tell you otherwise. If we do this right, no one bleeds." Mia swallowed and slid down another foot, unrolling a folded net from her pack. The bobcat's eyes tracked every movement, pupils wide, breath coming in ragged pulls. When Jake shifted his boots on the rock, the animal's growl scraped out of its throat again, low but steady, paws tightening on the canvas bag until the fabric creaked. "Hey, fella," Jake said softly. "Remember me? I'm still the same guy you yelled at 5 minutes ago. We're just moving a little closer, that's all." He edged down, keeping his body turned slightly sideways, hands visible. Mia circled higher, trying to get behind the animal without sending loose stones tumbling. Karen followed, staying just close enough to reach with the pole when the time came. Cole hung back a few steps, the set of his jaw making it clear he didn't care for this delicate dance. The bobcat waited until Jake was one pace nearer, then let loose with a sound that seemed to tear the fog in half. It lunged as far as its bad leg would allow, dragging the bag with it, teeth snapping the air between them. For a heartbeat, Jake saw straight down its souriez. Throat, saw the pink tongue, the broken canine, the copper taste of fear rising in his own mouth. "Now, Mia!" Karen shouted. Mia threw the net. It sailed out, a white blur, and dropped over cat and bag together. The bobcat thrashed, claws tangling in the mesh, body twisting in blind panic. The more it fought, the more the net tightened, but it never let go of the bag. Even tangled, even half falling, it clung to that green canvas like it was the last solid thing in the world. Cole took a step forward, hand snapping to his gun. "You're losing him! Move!" "Don't you dare!" Karen snapped, her voice suddenly sharp enough to cut. She darted in, jabbing the syringe through the net and into the thin fur of the cat's side. The bobcat shrieked, a high, broken note that made Mia flinch and Jake's stomach knot. Then, slowly, its movements grew weaker. The thrashing turned to jerky tugs, then to shivers, and finally to a trembling stillness. Its head sagged, muzzle dropping onto the bag. One paw stayed hooked through the strap, claws embedded in the canvas. Karen kept one hand on the pole, watching its chest rise and fall. "That's enough," she murmured. "That's it. Easy now. Just go to sleep." Silence fell over the creek bed, the kind of silence that feels full of breath being held. Even the birds seemed to have gone quiet. Jake let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Everybody okay?" Mia nodded, wiping a hand across her forehead. "I'll be better when this is over land and not rock," she muttered. Cole lowered his hand from his sidearm but didn't relax. "You've got 20 minutes before that wears off," he said. "Let's not waste it." Jake knelt near the bobcat's shoulder, careful to keep his fingers clear of its mouth. Up close, the animal smelled of wet fur, mud, and something underneath, old straw maybe, or the faint sweetness of a house where somebody baked more than they dusted. He reached carefully for the strap caught under the paw. "Easy, partner," he said softly. "We just need to borrow this for a minute." It took both his hands and Mia's to ease the claws out without tearing the animal's skin. Even unconscious, it seemed to resist, muscles tightening under its fur as if some part of it knew what they were doing. When at last the paw slipped free, the bag came away, leaving the bobcat lying small and exposed on the cold rock. Jake set the bag on a flatter stone. Up close, he could see where the canvas had been patched and stitched over the years, different colors of thread crossing one another. Whoever it belonged to had fixed it more than once instead of throwing it out. There was a small rip near the bottom, just big enough to see a glint of metal and a faded scrap of fabric inside. Mia knelt beside him. Karen stayed by the cat, fingers on its neck, counting heartbeats. Cole stood just behind, shadow falling over all three of them. "Go ahead," Cole said. "Let's see what our friend thought was worth dying over." Jake hesitated for half a second, then tugged the zipper. It moved with a sticky sound, catching on a bent tooth, then gave way. He folded the flap back. For a moment he didn't quite understand what he was seeing. At first it looked like a jumble of old junk. Metal glints, cloth scraps, dull squares of white. Then his eyes sorted it into pieces. He corned small brass bells, some shiny, some tarnished. He saw carefully cut patches of cloth, with names hand-stitched onto them in tiny, uneven letters. Daisy, Scout, Millie, Hank. He saw a stack of worn Polaroid photographs, corners curled, each one showing a cat, old, scarred, missing eyes or legs, curled up on the same worn kitchen rug beside the same pair of shoes. At the very bottom of the bag, half covered by a folded piece of cloth, lay a laminated card with a hospital logo on it. Jake picked it up and wiped a thumb across the surface. "Elijah Brooks," he read aloud. "Registered nurse, Cedar Hollow Medical Center. Emergency contact. None listed." Mia picked up one of the photographs. Her hand shook. This cat was young, spotted, with ears too tall and feet too big for its body, curled up between two gray tabbies like a child between grandparents. It looked straight at the camera with eyes Jake recognized instantly, even in cheap film and fading ink. "Oh my God," Mia whispered. "It's him. That's our bobcat. He's been here before." For a long beat, nobody said a word. The fog pressed in closer, the creek bed suddenly feeling like something sacred and private. Their jaws had dropped, just as surely as if someone had punched them in the gut. Whatever they'd thought this was, a wild animal, a dangerous nuisance, a problem to be solved, it wasn't that simple anymore. The bag wasn't just a bag. It was a traveling graveyard, a bundle of love and loss that a half-wild creature had dragged into the mountains and refused to let go. Cedar Hollow lay about 40 minutes down the mountain, a little town stitched together by one main street, 2 churches, and more front porches than stoplights. Jake drove with the bag on the seat beside him, the bells inside chiming softly each time he hit a bump. Mia rode in the back with the portable crate where the sedated bobcat lay curled, a blanket over the bars. Karen followed in her old SUV, talking on the phone to the small animal clinic where they'd stabilize him before any big decisions were made. They turned off onto a side road lined with older houses, most of them built before anyone worried about mortgage rates or home equity loans. The place Elijah Brooks called home was a narrow two-story house with peeling white paint and a porch sagging in the middle, like a tired man's shoulders. The yard was tidy, though, leaves raked, bird feeder full, a faded flag stirring on the front rail. A man in a flannel shirt was raking next door. He leaned on his rake when he saw the county SUV and the rescue truck pull up. "You folks looking for somebody?" he called, voice wary. Jake climbed out and held up the laminated card they'd found in the bag. "Elijah Brooks," he said. "This is still his address?" The man snorted. "Oh yeah, that'd be him, town cat man. Half the folks around here think he's crazy. Other half bring him their strays so they don't have to take him to the shelter. Name's Dugan." "Crazy how?" Mia asked, coming around the truck. She brushed hay from her knees where the Bobcat blanket had shed. Dugan shrugged. "Talks to cats like they're people. Spends his Social Security check on pet food, far as I can tell. I've heard him arguing with some vet over the phone about a bill once. Said he didn't care if it took him 10 years to pay off the medical bills as long as the cat got another 6 months. Barely leaves the house unless it's for the clinic or the hospital pharmacy. My wife says he used to be a nurse, back when health insurance didn't cost an arm and a leg." Jake glanced at the house. There were lace curtains in the windows and a crooked little wooden sign by the door with hand-painted flowers. It didn't look like the lair of a cruel man, but he'd learned long ago that you couldn't judge character by front porches or whether somebody paid their credit card debt on time. "We just need to talk to him," Jake said. "Thanks, Mr. Dugan." He climbed the porch steps, feeling the boards give a little under his weight, and knocked. It took longer than seemed right for someone to answer. Just as he raised his hand to knock again, the door opened a crack and a girl's face appeared in the gap. She was maybe 16, freckled, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a messy knot and a sweatshirt that said Cedar Hollow High. Her eyes drifted to the badge on Jake's jacket and then past him to the truck, where the crate sat under its blanket. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. "We're looking for Elijah Brooks," Jake said gently. "Is he here? It's not about a crime. It's about something that belongs to him." The girl hesitated, then opened the door wider. "I'm Lily," she said. "He's my grandpa. He's slow getting around some mornings. Come in, I'll get him." The smell hit Jake as soon as he stepped inside. Not the sour, eye-watering stink of neglect he half expected, but a mingling of cat fur, old wood furniture, and coffee. The living room was small but neat, with worn chairs, a bookshelf lined with paperbacks, and picture frames on every flat surface. Cat beds occupied every sunny spot on the floor and windowsill, some empty, some with sleepy tabbies watching the newcomers with half-closed eyes. Then he saw the walls. Running along the hallway and into the living room were strands of jute twine, strung like holiday garlands. From them hung dozens of small brass bells, each one tied with a scrap of cloth. Under many of them, taped carefully to the wall, were photographs. Cats on laps, cats in window light, cats curled up beside oxygen tanks and hospital beds. On a shelf by the doorway sat a thick binder labeled, in careful block letters, Vet Records. It looked, Jake thought, like somebody had taken a lifetime of family pictures and hung them up where he could see them every day. Only the family just happened to all have whiskers and tails. Lily disappeared down the short hall. Jake heard her knock on what must have been a bedroom door, murmur something, then the creak of bed springs and a man's sleepy voice. Mia stood just inside the living room, eyes wide, taking in the bells on the wall. Karen came in last, shoulders lowering a fraction when she saw the tidy bowls lined up by the kitchen doorway. A few moments later, Lily returned, supporting a man who looked like he'd once been tall and straight, but had settled into a gentle curve with age. Elijah Brooks wore an old flannel robe over a T-shirt that read Cedar Hollow Medical. His hair was thin and mostly white, his face lined in the way of someone who had spent decades listening to other people's pain. He held on to Lily's arm as if he wasn't quite awake yet. "Elijah," Jake said. "My name's Jake Miller. I'm with the County Search and Rescue. We, found something of yours up on the mountain." He picked up the green canvas bag from the chair where he'd set it and held it out. Elijah's eyes sharpened the moment he saw it. His hand slipped from Lily's arm. He stepped forward as if pulled by a string, fingers trembling. "Where did you—" His voice broke. He reached for the bag, then stopped short, as if afraid it would vanish if he touched it. "Creek bed off Ridge Loop," Jake said quietly. "There was a bobcat lying on it, bad leg, dehydrated. We brought him into the clinic. We thought at first it might be some kind of trash someone dumped. Then we looked inside." He set the bag on the coffee table and eased the zipper back. The bells chimed softly as the flap fell open, showing the jumble of metal and cloth and photographs they had seen in the fog. Elijah's gaze moved over them as if counting, as if checking that everyone was still there. When he spoke, it was in a whisper. "I thought I'd never see this again," he said. "I thought he was gone for good." Karen stepped closer. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice as gentle as she used in exam rooms. "We didn't mean to intrude into anything private. But we do need to ask. That bobcat, did he come from here?" Elijah's eyes flicked up to hers. Behind the weariness there was something else, something like old grief rubbed raw. "That's not just any bobcat," he said. "That's my boy. That's Jasper." The way he said the name, soft, reverent, full of a love that could have been meant for a child or a cherished patient, sent a small shiver through the room for a heartbeat. Jake thought of all the people Elijah must have watched die in hospital rooms, of pension checks and nursing home costs and a life spent holding hands that had no family. To hold them. He wondered how many names were sewn into the cloth in that bag, and how many more were written in a folder somewhere next to an old life insurance policy and a stack of unpaid vet bills. Lily slipped her hand into her grandfather's. "Tell them, Grandpa," she said. "Tell them about Jasper. They don't know." Elijah looked back down at the bag, at the bells and cloth and pictures that had traveled through the storm on a hurt animal's back, and took a long, steadying breath. "It started the winter after my Margaret died," he said quietly. "And it started with an ordinary house cat. Jasper just came later, and he was anything but ordinary." Elijah eased himself down into his chair as if the story itself had weight. Lily sat on the arm beside him, one hand on his shoulder. Jake, Mia, and Karen took the other seats in the little living room, careful not to disturb the cats that had claimed a cushion or two for themselves. The green bag lay open on the table between them, bells and scraps of cloth catching the afternoon light. "It started the winter after my Margaret died," Elijah said quietly. "House got real loud all of a sudden. Folks think an empty house is quiet, but it isn't. You hear the clock, the furnace, the refrigerator kicking on. You hear yourself think, I'd rather have listened to a fire alarm at 3 a.m. than listened to my own thoughts in those days." He glanced at Jake, the old fireman, and there was a flicker of understanding between them. "I had her little life insurance payout," he went on, "and my nurse's pension, and a stack of hospital bills I could barely look at. Lily's folks kept asking about my health insurance, my prescriptions, whether I'd thought about selling the house, maybe downsizing, getting an apartment closer to town. I told them I was fine. I wasn't. I just didn't know what to do with all that empty air." He smiled faintly. Then one night it started to snow, the heavy kind that falls in big, wet clumps. I was sitting right there, in that chair, watching the news talk about mortgage rates and credit card debt and whatever else people worry about, and I heard this little sound on the porch, scratching, then a thump. I thought maybe a branch had come down." He saw it again as he spoke, the pale light, the snow swirling in the beam over the front steps, and a skinny gray cat pressed against the door, fur-soaked, eyes too bright. "She was just a little thing," he said. "Old, too. You can tell after a while. Somebody's lap cat once, I imagine. No collar. I told myself I'd just put a towel down in the laundry room for the night, just so I wouldn't wake up to a frozen body on the porch." He shook his head. "You know how that ended. She made a noise when I picked her up, this rusty little purr, and I hadn't heard that sound in months. Next thing I knew, I was at the vet in the morning, handing over my credit card and thinking I was out of my mind. Kidney trouble, arthritis, bad teeth. The kind of case most people don't want to take on. But she'd curl up on my chest at night and purr until I fell asleep. First time I'd slept through the night since Margaret's last day." He nodded toward the wall where the bells hung. "When she died, I realized I couldn't just put her in the ground and be done. I'd spent my whole working life learning that you don't just walk away from a body and forget the name. So I took one of those little bells off an old Christmas ornament, and I stitched her name onto a piece of fabric from an old flannel shirt. I didn't know I was starting anything. I just knew I needed to keep her close." Word got around. One neighbor had a cat that outlived her by a year and a half, and the nursing home couldn't take animals, would Elijah mind. Someone from his old hospital called about a patient going into assisted living who was sick over what would happen to her old Tom. One by one they arrived at his door, thin, sick, scared, or just unwanted. "I told myself I was being practical," he said. "Better me than the shelter. But truth was, I needed them more than they needed me. I'd sit at the kitchen table, at night, sewing those names onto scraps, listening to those bells. It was like having a little choir of goodbyes." He fell quiet for a moment. One of the house cats, a plump tortoiseshell, jumped up onto the arm of his chair and leaned into his hand. "Jasper came later," Elijah said. "That was Lily's doing." Lily smiled a little through the tightness around her eyes. "There was a storm," she said, "a couple of winters back. Power went out at school. Mom came to get me. And on the way home we stopped at the grocery store. I heard this crying behind the dumpster. Thought it was a kitten." "It looked like a kitten," Elijah agreed. "Mostly, too long in the legs, ears too big for his head, paws like somebody had put the wrong size on him by mistake. Dappled coat, kind of like a cheap leopard print blanket. Lily wrapped him up in her scarf and marched him right in here like she was delivering a registered letter. They'd figured he was some kind of fancy mix, maybe with a wild strain in him. The vet had narrowed her eyes, warned Elijah to be careful, but by then Jasper had already wriggled his way into the tangle of old cats that ruled the house. "He was a menace for the furniture," Elijah said, and for the first time his eyes warmed. "Couldn't keep him off the curtain rods. He'd leap from the back of that couch to the top of the bookcase like gravity didn't apply. But he was gentle. Gentle with the old ones, anyway. He'd slide in next to them, all elbows and knees, and just fit himself around them." Karen's gaze drifted to a photograph on the wall, a spotted youngster sprawled on a rug, an old one-eyed cat tucked against his side. "That's Mabel," Elijah said, following her eyes. "She came from a nursing home patient of mine. Lady didn't have anybody left but that cat. When she passed, the staff called me. Said nobody else wanted a half-blind, half-deaf, 15-year-old cat." Mabel had become the house nurse. New arrivals got her first. She'd sidle up, bump her head under their chin, and start that rough, steady purr that said you were safe now. When Jasper arrived, half wild and half starved, it was Mabel who took him in hand, or in paw. She'd curl herself around him like she was tucking in a child. Her bell, a little brass one with a softer tone than the others, announced them everywhere they went. "You could tell where they were in the house by that sound," Elijah said. I used to wake up at night and hear it downstairs. Made me feel like somebody was still making rounds. Time did what time always does. Mabel's kidneys worsened. The vet laid out the options, the estimates, the polite warning about costs. Elijah listened with the same focused, tired patience he'd once used when a doctor was talking to him about Margaret's treatment plan. He thought about co-pays and home insurance and the way his savings account shrank every month. "I knew it was crazy," he said softly, "spending that kind of money on an old cat when folks out there can't pay their medical bills. But I'd held too many hands and told too many families there's nothing more we can do to say it to her without trying everything first." Mabel got a few good months out of it. She moved slower, slept more, but still made her rounds, bell chiming as she checked on each bed and bowl. Jasper stayed close. On cold nights, they'd lie together by the gas fireplace. One small and spotted, one thin and gray, their breathing in time with each other. "The night she died, it was storming," Elijah said. "Thunder shaking the roof like somebody dragging furniture upstairs. I was sitting right there, and they were in front of the fire. Jasper had wedged himself so close against her I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began." He swallowed. "I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the storm was still going, but the room was different. Quiet, somehow. Jasper was sitting up, staring at her. Just staring. She was gone. He kept nudging her with his head. Then he started making this sound I'd never heard from him. Not quite a meow, not quite a growl. Like he was calling her back from somewhere he couldn't reach." For days after, Jasper searched. He went room to room, nose working, eyes bright and wild. He'd paw at the wall where Mabel's bell had hung before Elijah took it down. He dragged scraps of cloth out of the sewing basket, carried them to the green bag that sat by the kitchen door. The bag where Elijah tucked each bell and name when a cat's time was done. "I thought I was the only one who understood what that bag meant," Elijah said. "Turns out I was wrong." One night, another storm rolled in. Lily was staying over because the roads were bad. She woke to the sound of Jasper scratching at the back door, harder than usual, bells clinking in the dark. "I went downstairs," Lily said softly. He had the bag between his teeth, dragging it across the floor. "I tried to take it, but he growled at me. Not like he wanted to hurt me. Just like it was his." Elijah spread his hands. By morning he was gone. Door had blown open a crack. Bag was gone too. I thought I'd lost him. Both of them in a way. Her memory and the boy who loved her. He looked at the open bag on the table, at the bells that had made the journey back to him on Jasper's back, through wind and rain and fear. "And now," he said, voice rough, "you're telling me he dragged all of that up a mountain and fought you people over it like his life depended on it. I suppose, for him, it did." News travels fast in a small town, faster than any breaking news alert or social media feed. By the time Jake and Mia left Elijah's house, folks in Cedar Hollow were already talking. Someone had seen the rescue truck at the clinic. Someone else had seen the crate being unloaded, a spotted flank visible through the bars. By afternoon, Jake's phone was full of messages from people wanting to know if it was safe to let their kids walk home from school, whether they needed more home insurance in case a wildcat got into the yard, if this was going to show up on the evening news. Sheriff's office didn't wait. They called for a community meeting at the town hall, the same low brick building where people paid their property taxes, renewed car registrations, and sat through school board arguments about budgets and test scores. The parking lot was nearly full when Jake pulled in that evening. Karen's SUV was already there, along with Cole's patrol car and a van from the local TV station. Inside, the air hummed with restless talk. Folding chairs filled the central room, the old hardwood floor creaking under the shifting weight of neighbors. A couple of parents had brought kids who sat with wide eyes clutching their phones. An older man in a ball cap whispered to his wife about rising vet bills and health insurance premiums. It all blended into one familiar murmur of worry, the same tone people used when talking about mortgage payments, gas prices, or retirement plans that suddenly didn't look big enough. Cole stood at the front, uniform crisp, jaw set. Beside him, Karen adjusted a small stack of papers she probably didn't need. Jake and Mia slipped into seats along the side. A tripod stood near the back, red light glowing on the camera as a young reporter murmured into her microphone, practicing an intro about wildlife, public safety, and community concern. When Elijah and Lily walked in, conversation dipped. Some people looked surprised. Others nudged each other, whispering, "That's him. That's the cat man." Elijah's robe had been replaced by a clean shirt and worn slacks, but he still looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from more nights in hospitals than at home. Lily stayed close, shoulders squared like someone bracing for a storm. Cole tapped the microphone. The room settled. "Evening," he said. "I know everybody's got supper dishes in the sink and better things to do than sit here with me, so I'll get straight to it. This afternoon, Search and Rescue and Dr. Holt here brought in an injured bobcat from up on Ridge Loop. That animal was found near one of our more popular hiking trails. It was in bad shape and from what they tell me, extremely defensive." A ripple ran through the room. Somebody muttered something about grandkids and school bus stops. "We've all seen the stories on TV," Cole went on. "Wild animals getting too used to people, bears breaking into kitchens, coyotes in city parks. I don't have to tell you what that can mean for property values, for safety, for our own peace of mind. My job is to keep you safe. Sometimes that means making hard calls, whether it's about a dangerous dog, a drunk driver, or, yes, a wildcat that's crossed a line." He let that hang there a moment. Jake could feel the room leaning toward the idea, subtle as a shift in wind. Karen stepped up to the microphone when he nodded to her. "I'm not here to argue with safety," she said. "I've sewn up enough bite wounds on both people and pets to know what these animals can do. But before anyone decides what should happen to this particular bobcat, you need to know the whole story." She told it calmly. The creek bed, the bag, the way the cat had chosen to guard the canvas instead of run. She described the contents they'd found, the bells and patches and photographs. A few people shook their heads like it was too strange to be real. "It's not just a wild animal wandering through your backyard," she said. "This is an animal that has lived among people, in a house, with other cats. He's what we call imprinted, pulled between two worlds. That makes him unpredictable. It also makes him our responsibility. We helped create this situation, whether we meant to or not." A man in a work jacket stood. "With respect, Doc," he said, "I've got grandkids at the elementary school and a house I'm still paying off. I can barely keep up with my own credit card bills and car insurance, and now I'm supposed to worry about a half-tame bobcat? We can't afford that kind of risk." A murmur of agreement rose. Cole didn't have to say anything. The crowd was saying it for him. Get rid of the problem. End the worry. Move on. Lily rose before anyone asked her to. She wasn't tall, but in that moment she seemed to stand on something inside herself that gave her a little extra height. "Can I show you something?" she asked, voice wavering but loud enough. "Please?" The reporter, sensing a moment, swung the camera around. Someone dimmed the lights while Lily plugged her phone into the projector cable the school board used for PowerPoints. The first video was shaky, shot in Elijah's living room. On the screen, Jasper was smaller, still growing into his paws. Mabel lay beside him, bony and gray, her one good eye half closed. Jasper had curled his body around her, careful as a blanket. Every so often, he'd lean down and nudge the little brass bell on her collar with his nose. then lift his head when it chimed, as if making sure she was still there. The next clip showed him padding slowly beside Elijah's leg as the old man walked through what looked like a nursing home hallway, the bell on Mabel's collar jingling with each step. A frail hand reached out from a bed, fingers brushing Mabel's fur. Jasper sat down on the floor beside the bed and stayed there, still and quiet, until the clip ended. "That's the monster you're all so afraid of," Lily said softly. "He was born wrong for a house cat and wrong for the wild, but he tried. He loved Mabel. He loved my grandpa. He sat with people who were dying when nobody else wanted to come at 2 a.m. You talk about retirement plans and long-term care and attorneys and all the things you worry about at the end of life. Jasper doesn't know any of that. He just knows when someone is alone." An older woman near the front rose slowly, leaning on her cane. People made space for her without thinking. Everybody knew Mrs. Greeley, who'd spent more time in the nursing home than she liked to admit since her husband passed. "She's right," Mrs. Greeley said. "I was there. My roommate, she was on hospice. No family, no lawyer, no big life insurance policy, just me and the nurses. And that man," she pointed at Elijah, "came in with that spotted cat and that little gray one. They'd sit on the bed and purr, and my roommate—" She smiled. First time I'd seen her smile in weeks. That cat didn't look dangerous then. He looked like an angel that took the wrong shape. Silence settled over the room like a blanket. Even Cole's shoulders had dropped a notch. "I'm not saying you ought to turn him loose in town," Mrs. Greeley went on. "I don't want him on my back porch any more than the rest of you. But maybe don't talk about him like he's some kind of demon that crawled out of the woods looking for children. Seems to me he's just lost. And I know what that feels like." The knot in the room loosened just a little. The fear was still there. Fear of bills, of danger, of one more thing life could throw at them. But it had been joined by something else. A picture of a cat pressed against an old woman's side, a bell chiming softly in a quiet hallway, and a half-wild heart that had once simply tried to do what it understood as right. In the end, the decision didn't come from one speech or one person. It came from a slow shifting of faces in that town hall, from Mrs. Greeley's cane and Lily's trembling hands, and the way Elijah sat very still, like a man bracing for a verdict. The county commissioner stood up, cleared his throat, and said what everyone had been circling around. "We can't turn him loose," he said, "and we can't keep him in a cage at the clinic forever. Dr. Holt, you said there's a sanctuary downstate that takes animals like this." Karen nodded. Ridge Haven Wildlife Sanctuary. They specialize in what they call in-betweeners, animals that are too human-habituated to be safely released, but too wild to be pets. Their vet is one of the best. They'll give Jasper a real evaluation. If he can live like a wild bobcat, he'll have room to roam. If not, he'll still have a safe enclosure and proper care. They live on donations, grants, people's good hearts. It's not cheap, but it's the right kind of bill to pay. Someone muttered about taxes. Someone else said they'd rather see money go to that than another glossy brochure about mortgage refinance or a billboard for low-interest credit cards. It was a familiar argument in a different wrapping. Cole glanced at Elijah. "Mr. Brooks," he said, voice more cautious than before, "this cat has history with you. If we send him there, they'll keep you updated. They might let you visit now and again, but it won't be the same as having him under your own roof. You understand that?" Elijah's fingers worried the edge of his sleeve. He looked older than his years just then, like every chart he'd ever filled out in a fluorescent-lit hospital had settled on his shoulders. "I understand," he said. "I also understand what happens when people keep trying to hold on to what they can't have. I spent a lot of years beside beds where folks were fighting over life insurance and home insurance and who got the house, while the person in the bed just wanted someone to hold their hand. Jasper doesn't need me to be selfish on top of everything else. He deserves a chance to be what he was born as. So it was decided. Papers were signed. Karen spent the next morning on the phone with Ridge Haven, sending medical records by email and fax like it was still 3 different decades at once. The sanctuary director, a man named Nolan Price, agreed to take Jasper on a trial basis. There were forms about liability and transport and emergency care that looked, to Elijah's eye, a lot like the insurance paperwork he'd filled out for Margaret all those years ago. This time, he signed without hesitation. They chose a day when the forecast promised scattered showers, which in the mountains could mean anything from a light mist to the kind of downpour that made you think about flood insurance. By the time Jake backed the rescue truck up to the clinic's loading bay, the sky had already turned the color of old pewter. Jasper was awake but woozy when they slid his crate into the truck bed. He pressed his body against the back wall, eyes narrowed, watching every motion. His injured leg was splinted. His fur was a little cleaner. His ribs did not show quite so sharply. But when Elijah came close, holding the green bag in his arms, the Bobcat's pupils flared, and he gave a low, pleading sound deep in his throat. "He remembers," Mia said quietly. Elijah rested his wrinkled hand against the bars. "I know, boy," he murmured. "I know. I brought it." Karen hesitated. "The sanctuary suggested we minimize human attachments in the crate," she said. "Blanket, water, nothing that keeps him stuck in the past. It's like trying to get out of credit card debt. You don't do it by opening another account." Elijah managed a small smile. "I get that. But if you woke up from surgery in a strange hospital and they'd taken your wedding ring and your wallet and every picture out of your room, you'd panic. Let him have it for the ride. After that, you and this Dr. Price can do what you think best." Jake sided with him. "Fear'll kill him faster than the broken leg," he said. "Let the bag ride shotgun." They compromised. The memory bag would go into the crate, but at the far end, where Jasper could reach it if he wanted. As they slid it inside, the bells chimed faintly. Jasper's head snapped around. He crawled across the straw and rested his chin on the canvas, eyes half closing, as if the sound itself was a sedative no health insurance plan could ever list on a form. Elijah climbed into the back seat of the truck's cab, Lily beside him. Jake took the wheel. Karen followed again in her SUV, Cole bringing up the rear in his patrol car, just in case. The first drops hit the windshield before they'd cleared the town limits. By the time they reached the twisty part of the mountain road, the rain had turned into a steady sheet, the kind that made you lean forward over the steering wheel and turn the wipers up one more notch, even though they were already beating as fast as they could. "Road slick," Jake said, more to himself than anyone. "Everybody buckle up." Lily glanced back through the rear window into the truck bed, where the crate was strapped down. She couldn't see much besides the gray smear of the storm and the faint outline of Jasper's shape. "Do you think he knows this is for his own good?" she asked. Elijah looked straight ahead, watching the yellow lines glisten under the headlights. "I don't know if any of us ever knows that when our life gets picked up and moved," he said. "When they wheeled your grandma down to oncology, she asked me if this was really going to help or if we were just buying time on a credit plan we couldn't afford. I told her the truth. We were buying a chance. That's all you can ever buy." A gust of wind shoved the truck sideways just enough to make everyone stiffen. The back end fishtailed for a breath and then caught again. "Whoa," Jake muttered. The radio on his dash crackled. Cole's voice came through, tight. "Easy there. One false move, and that crate's in a ditch. You lose that animal in this weather, and I won't have a choice if he comes out of it mean." "We're fine," Jake said into the mic. "Just a slick patch. We'll take it slow." From the truck bed came a sudden clatter, the sound of claws scrabbling on metal. Jasper had been thrown against the side of the crate by the lurch. He let out a hoarse, raw sound, half snarl, half terrified cry. The bells in the bag jingled wildly. Lily twisted around, pressing her palm against the glass. "Jasper!" she called, though he couldn't hear her through the rain and the engine noise. In the crate, the Bobcat lunged and slammed his shoulder against the bars, eyes rolling white. His world had become a shaking box and roaring water and the smell of fear. He threw himself forward again, and for a moment Jake felt the weight shift in the truck bed. "Jake?" Karen's voice came over the radio now, steady but urgent. "If he panics hard enough and hurts that leg, we could lose him before we even get there. We need him calm." Elijah reached for the sliding panel in the back window, the one usually used to pass tools through. With a bit of effort, he shoved it open. The roar of the rain grew louder. He could smell wet metal and straw. "Jasper!" he called, his voice thin against the storm. "Hey, boy, listen to me." Another thump, another rattle of metal, then a pause. Elijah could see a flicker of gold as one wild eye found the opening. Very carefully, Elijah lifted the memory bag and shook it once, just enough to set the bells chiming. The clear, soft note threaded through the rain like a familiar voice down a hospital corridor. Jasper froze. His ears pricked. He pushed himself toward the sound, claws catching in the straw, then sank down with his chest against the canvas. His side still heaved, but the frantic edge had eased. He closed his eyes, nose pressed into the bag that smelled of cats and kitchens and a life that made sense. In the cab, the tension eased too. Lily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd held. Jake's hands relaxed slightly on the wheel. "See?" Elijah said quietly, more to himself than anyone. "Everybody needs something that tells them they're not alone. Some folks cling to a savings account or a stack of insurance papers. He has this." The rain began to slacken as they left the steepest curves behind. Far ahead, through the clouds, a thin strip of lighter sky showed where the storm was breaking. They still had miles to go, and more decisions waiting at the end of the road, but for now the truck held steady, the bells lay quiet, and Jasper rode with his cheek against the bag that had carried all his ghosts. On his way to a place where, for the first time, he might learn what it meant to be whole. Ridgehaven sat in a fold of land where the mountains softened into long, low ridges and pasture. From the highway it looked like any small farm, with a weathered barn, a cluster of outbuildings, and a gravel drive lined with scraggly pines. Up close, though, you could see the tall fencing, the double gates, the signs about not feeding the animals and not crossing the yellow line. Jake rolled to a stop by the main office, a small building that smelled of coffee, hay, and disinfectant. A man in his 50s stepped out onto the porch as they climbed down. He wore a faded ball cap and a jacket with Ridgehaven stitched over the pocket. His eyes were the kind that had seen plenty and judged slowly. "You must be Miller," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Nolan Price. You brought us quite a story." Jake shook his hand. "He wrote most of it himself," he said. "We just turned the pages." They unloaded the crate together, Nolan guiding them to a quieter lane behind the barn. The enclosures they passed weren't cages so much as fenced pieces of hillside, rocks, trees, brush, all contained in high chain link. In one, a fox with a half-missing tail watched them pass. In another, a wolf dog paced and then settled when a young woman with a clipboard called his name. "That's Tasha," Nolan said. "She keeps the paperwork straight and the animals honest. We get a lot of in-betweeners out here. Coyotes raised on fast food, raccoon families that think drive-through windows are hunting grounds, even a deer that was bottle-fed in somebody's kitchen. Folks mean well, but they forget wild is a language you can't teach out with a credit card and good intentions." They set Jasper's crate inside a small intake pen attached to a larger enclosure. The gate clanged shut. Nolan crouched, studying the bobcat through the bars. "He's thin," Nolan said, "and that leg's going to bother him in cold weather. But he's got fire. You can see it in the eyes." Fire and confusion. The memory bag lay in the corner where Jasper had dragged it, bells muted now. Elijah stood just outside the outer fence, hands resting on the top rail. He watched as Jasper pressed himself into the farthest corner of the crate, torn between the bag and the new smells all around. "How does this work?" Elijah asked quietly. "Do you just open the door and hope he doesn't have a heart attack?" Nolan smiled a little. "If only it were that simple," he said. "First we let him get used to the sounds and smells, other cats, wind, space. We move slow. Fast changes break things. You of all people know that. Anybody who's filled out health insurance forms and hospital admission papers does." Tasha came over with a tablet in hand. "We'll log his behavior," she said, more to Elijah than to Nolan. "When he eats, how he reacts to noises, whether he's more interested in the bag or what's beyond the fence. We're looking for curiosity. Curiosity is a sign he still wants to live forward, not backward." They left Jasper in that transition pen for the first few days. He spent the first 24 hours wedged between the crate wall and the memory bag, eyes slits, ears flicking at every unfamiliar call from the hillside. When the wind stirred the bells, he'd give a little huff and press closer. The food dish at the front of the crate went untouched until well into the second night. On the third morning, Tasha noted something different. Jasper had moved. The bag lay where it had been, but he sat at the front of the crate, nose against the bars, watching a resident bobcat move along the fence in the adjoining enclosure. His ears tracked the other animals' steps. When the wind shifted and brought the smell of pine and damp earth, he lifted his head and drew it in, long and slow. "He's listening," Tasha said in her report. "That's step one." Bit by bit, they shifted the world around him. The crate door opened into the small pen. Jasper crept out, then dashed back in at the first snap of a twig. They left the memory bag inside at first. He slept on it at night, but during the day he began to spend more time at the far side of the pen, sniffing the breeze that came up over the hill. Finally, on Nolan's orders, they moved the bag just outside the fence, hanging it on a low post where Jasper could still see and smell it, but not reach it. He paced beneath it for an hour, tail lashing, emitting a low, frustrated croak. Then, as afternoon sun warmed the rocks, he climbed one, lay down, and watched a vulture trace circles in the sky. The bag swayed a little when the wind shifted, and a bell chimed. Jasper's ear twitched. He didn't move. While Jasper was learning the new language of trees and wind, Elijah was learning a different one back in Cedar Hollow. The house felt hollow in a new way now that the green bag was gone. The bells on the walls seemed louder some nights, like a chorus of questions. Lily came over one afternoon with a brochure from the nursing home. "They're starting a senior cat foster program," she said. "Some of their residents can't manage adoption on their own, but they'd love a cat for a while. They need somebody to bring the cats in, make sure the paperwork and the vet care are squared away. The social worker said they could maybe even pay a little stipend. Not much, but enough for gas and cat food," Elijah finished, taking the paper. He looked it over the same way he'd once looked at mortgage offers and retirement plans, weighing cost against meaning. "You think an old man like me could handle that?" "I think you've been handling that your whole life," Lily said. "This just makes it official." So he went. He sat with residents who missed the dogs they'd had to leave behind when the nursing home bills started eating their savings. He carried in old Toms and shy calicos, talking softly as he set them on quilts. He brought his sewing basket too, and as he listened to stories about long marriages, lost farms, and grown children scattered by jobs and housing prices, he stitched names onto scraps of cloth. Not for a memory bag this time, but for collars that would go home with the cats when they found new laps. Every evening, when he got back, he checked his email the way other folks checked online banking. Tasha sent reports. Jasper ate well today. Jasper climbed the highest rock. Jasper startled at a truck backfire, but didn't run to the bag. A short video showed Jasper sliding along a log, muscles moving under his coat, head high as he watched another bobcat across the way. "He looks taller," Lily said, peering at the screen. "He looks like he remembered something his bones knew before I ever found him," Elijah replied. In the last clip of the batch, the camera lingered on Jasper, sitting beneath the post where the memory bag hung. The bells were still. He glanced up at it just once, then turned his head toward the ridge where the trees leaned into the wind and a wild sound drifted faintly down from some invisible hollow. He didn't move toward the bag. He moved toward the sound. The invitation came on a Tuesday, in an email that arrived between a reminder about a dental appointment and a notice from his bank. Elijah almost missed it. He clicked it open expecting another ad about Medicare plans or pet insurance, and instead saw Nolan's name and the words, "I think it's time you came to see him." Lily printed the message out because paper still felt more real than screens to both of them. They spread it on the kitchen table next to a neat stack of vet receipts and the folder where Elijah kept his life insurance policy and the papers about Margaret's estate. For once, he pushed all of that aside without a second thought. "You ready for this, Grandpa?" Lily asked. "I don't know if anybody's ever ready for goodbyes," he said, "but I reckon Jasper's been doing the hard work without me. Least I can do is show up." The day they drove back to Ridge Haven, the sky was clear and high, the way mountain skies get in early fall. The grass along the fences had gone from summer green to a tired yellow. A light wind tugged at Elijah's jacket as he stepped out of the car. He felt every year in his knees, every night shift he'd ever worked, but there was a steadiness in his chest he hadn't had in a long time. Nolan met them at the gate with Tasha at his elbow. "He's in the upper enclosure now," Nolan said. "Bigger space, rocks, trees, the whole hillside. I won't promise you he'll come running when he sees you. That's not how this works. But he knows you were here once, and he's not afraid of people. That's both the blessing and the curse." They walked up the gravel path together, Jake and Mia a few steps. Behind with Karen, all of them quieter than usual. The sanctuary hummed around them, birds calling, a distant bark from one of the in-between dogs, the rustle of leaves against high chain link. As they climbed, Elijah saw the enclosures open out into real pieces of mountain, not just pens. One held a trio of bobcats, moving with the casual assurance of animals who had grown used to the space. Jasper's enclosure was at the far end, where the hill broke into a rocky outcrop. The fence followed the lay of the land, enclosing boulders and scrub pines, a few low trees. Near the middle, a tall rock jutted up like a small throne. Hung on a post near the fence line, at eye level for a man and nose level for a bobcat, was the green memory bag, bells dull in the sun. "There," Nolan said softly. "He likes to watch from that rock. Give him a minute." At first they saw nothing, just rocks, grass, shadows. Then a shape resolved on the sunlit stone, spotted fur, thick and clean now, ears pricked forward. Jasper lay stretched along the warm surface, eyes half closed, tail tip twitching lazily. Karen touched Elijah's arm. "He looks good," she said. "That means more than any lab report I could show you." Elijah stepped up to the fence, fingers curling around the cool metal. The pattern of diamonds pressed into his palms. For a long moment he didn't say anything. He just looked. "Jasper," he said at last, as if he were calling a child in from play. "Hey, boy." The bobcat's ears flicked. His head lifted. For a second he stared toward the trees, as if not sure where the sound had come from. Then he turned, slow and deliberate, and looked down the hill. Their eyes met across the distance, man and animal, one behind chain link, the other behind years of history. Elijah saw recognition there, and something else, questioning, maybe. The way patients had sometimes looked at him when he came in on the night shift, checking their charts and their IV lines and the names on their wristbands. Jasper rose. He moved with a confidence Elijah had never seen inside his little house. No more hunched shoulders, no more hesitating at doorways. He walked down off the rock, picking his way between stones, tail held low but not tucked. Halfway he stopped and sniffed the wind, eyes half closing as a gust brought the scents of strangers and the faint metallic tang of the fence. Then he came on. Elijah stayed where he was. His heart thudded hard enough to make his ribs ache, but his hands didn't shake. He'd stood beside too many bedsides to flinch now. Lily slipped her hand into his. He felt the small, strong squeeze of her fingers. Jasper reached the fence and stopped just short of it. Up close, he was bigger than Elijah remembered, all long muscle and thick fur. The splinted leg had healed into a faint stiffness, but he stood square and sure on all four paws. His gaze moved from Elijah's face to Lily's and back, as if he were counting them. "Hi there," Elijah said softly. "You've done some growing up without me." For a long breath, nothing moved but the grass. Then Jasper stepped forward until his whiskers brushed the metal. Slowly, cautiously, Elijah lifted one hand and laid it flat against the fence. Jasper smelled his fingers first, nose working. Then, in a motion that was almost laughably gentle for an animal with teeth like his, he lowered his head and pressed his forehead against the spot where Elijah's hand touched the mesh. The fence rattled just a little. A small rough sound came from Jasper's chest, not quite a purr, not quite a growl, something between. It was not a plea to be let out. It was not a demand to go home. It felt to Elijah like a thank you. A breeze stirred the hillside. The bells on the memory bag chimed once, a clear, small note. Jasper's ear twitched. He glanced toward the bag, then back to Elijah. "That bag won't be going anywhere," Nolan said quietly from behind them. "We figured he earned that much, but he doesn't lie under it all day anymore. Mostly he uses it like a mile marker, a reminder of where he came from, not a leash tying him down." Jasper leaned his head against the fence one more time, then stepped back. He looked up the hill toward the rock where he'd been lying. Without another sound, he turned and walked away, climbing back to his sun-warmed perch. At the top, he paused and flicked his tail once, like a wave. Then he settled down, facing the wind and the wild sounds beyond the sanctuary fence. "That's it?" Lily whispered, surprised by how full her chest felt. "He just goes?" Elijah nodded. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "That's it," he said. "You don't drag them back once they've found their footing. You just stand where they can see you, in case they ever look over their shoulder." Later, in Nolan's office, they watched a short piece of security camera footage on the computer. "Caught this a few nights ago," Nolan said. "Thought you might like to see." The grainy image showed Jasper's enclosure under a wash of moonlight. The memory bag hung dark against the fence post. Jasper padded into frame, alone, his steps quiet. He walked straight to the post, looked up at the bag for a long moment, then curled himself into a loose circle at its base. He laid his chin on his forepaws, eyes drifting shut. For a time, nothing moved but his sides, rising and falling. At last he lifted his head, glanced once toward the ridge where the other cats called, and slipped away into the rocks, leaving the bag to sway gently behind him. On the drive home, the talk turned not to fear or insurance or what-ifs, but to smaller, kinder plans. Lily wanted to design a little pamphlet about their senior cat foster program for the nursing home, something simple she could print at home without worrying about fancy marketing or advertising costs. Mia offered to drop off a few at the clinic. Jake said he knew a guy at the local radio station who might mention it between segments about mortgage tips and retirement planning. That evening, as the sun went down behind the Blue Ridge, Elijah climbed his porch steps with a carrier in his hands. Inside, an elderly marmalade cat blinked up at him, whiskers graying, eyes wary but hopeful. "Temporary stay," Elijah told him as he opened the door. "You're not stuck with me. My job is to keep you safe and fed and loved till we find the place you really belong. Kind of like a good doctor or a decent home insurance policy, if we're being honest." The cat stepped out cautiously, sniffing the air that smelled of coffee and old wood and a lifetime of quiet bells. Elijah bent to stroke his back, then straightened and looked at the empty spot on the wall where the memory bag used to hang. "I didn't lose him," he said softly, more to himself than to the cat. "I just finally let him be who he was always meant to be." Somewhere beyond the mountains, in a sanctuary under the same rising moon, a bobcat lifted his head to the wind, listening. In another little house in Cedar Hollow, an old nurse and a new cat settled into a chair together, the weight of the day easing from their shoulders, and in the space between wild and home, loss and love, something quiet and steady took root, the way it always does when someone finds the courage to open their hands and let go. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.